way too many people overestimated the value of that speed. If you need 1,000 computers online in the next 15 minutes, nothing beats the cloud. How would you even procure that? If we just need another 20 servers, it's going to take a week or two to get boxes shipped on pallets, delivered to a data center and unwrapped and racked and all that stuff, right? But how often do we need to do that? And how often do we need to do that if buying those servers is way, way cheaper, such that we get vastly more compute for the same amount of money? Could we just buy more servers and not even care about the fact that we're not hyper-optimized on the compute utility, that we don't have to use things like automatic scaling to figure things out because we have to reduce costs? Yes, we can. So we went through this journey over a realization in early 2023 when I had finally had enough with our bills. I wanted to get rid of them. I wanted to spend less money. I wanted to keep more of the money ourselves. And in just over 6 months, we moved 7 major applications out of the cloud in terms of compute, caching, databases that works onto our own servers, a glorious, beautiful new fleet bought from the king of servers, Michael Dell, who really, by the way, is another icon of mine. I saw he just celebrated 41 years in business. 41 years. This man has been selling awesome servers that we've been using for our entire existence. But anyway, these pallets arrive in a couple of weeks, and we rack them up and get everything going, and we were out, at least with the compute part. We then had a long multi-year commitment to S3, because the only way to get decent pricing in the cloud, by the way, is not to buy on a day-to-day basis, not to rent on a database basis, but to bind yourself up to multi-year contracts. With compute, it's often a year. That was in our case. And with storage, it was 4 years. We signed a 4-year contract to store our petabytes of customer files in the cloud to be able to get something just halfway decent affordable. So all of these projects came together to the sense that we're now saving literally millions of dollars, projected about 10 million over 5 years. It's always hard. How do you do the accounting exactly? And TOC, this, that, and the other thing. But it's millions of dollars. But it's not just that. It's also the fact that getting out of the cloud meant returning to more of an original idea of the internet. That the internet was not designed such that 3 computers should run everything. It was a distributed network such that the individual nodes could disappear and the whole thing would still carry on. DARPA designed this such that the Russians could take out Washington and they could still fight back from New York. That the entire communication infrastructure wouldn't disappear because there was no hub and spoke. It was a network. I always found that an immensely beautiful vision. That you could have this glorious internet and no single node was in control of everything. And we've returned to much more of a single node controlling everything idea with these hyperscalers. When US East 1, the main and original region for AWS, goes offline, which just happened more than a few times over the years, seemingly a third of the internet is offline. Like that in itself is just an insult to DARPA's design. It doesn't detract from the fact that what AWS built was marvelous. I think the cloud has moved so many things so far forward, especially around virtualization, automation, setup. It's all those giant leaps forward for system administration that's allowing us now to be able to run things on-prem in a way that smells and feels much like the cloud, just at half the cost or less. And with the autonomy and the satisfaction of owning hardware. I don't know what the last time you looked at like an actual server and took it apart and looked inside of it. These things are gorgeous. I mean, I posted a couple of pictures of our racks out in the data center, and people always go crazy for them because we've gotten so abstracted from what the underlying metal looks like in this cloud age that most people have no idea. They have no idea how powerful a modern CPU is. They have no idea how much RAM you can fit into a 1U rack. Progress in computing has been really exciting, especially I'd say in the last 4 to 5 years after TSMC, with Apple's help, really pushed the envelope. I mean, we kind of sat still there for a while Intel was spinning their wheels going nowhere. And then TSMC, with Apple propelling them, really moved things forward. And now servers are exciting again. Like you're getting jumps year over year in the 15, 20% rather than the single digit we were stuck with for a while. And that all means that owning your own hardware is a more feasible proposition than it's ever been, that you need fewer machines to run ever more, and that more people should do it. Because as much as I love Jeff and Amazon, like he doesn't need another, 40% margin on all the tech stuff that I buy to run our business. And this is just something I've been focused on, both because of the ideology around honoring DARPA's original design, the practicality of running our own hardware, seeing how fast we can push things with the latest machines, and then saving the money. And that has all been so enjoyable to do, but also so counterintuitive for a lot of people, because it seemed, I think, for a lot of people in the industry that like we'd all decided that we were done buying computers, that was something we would just delegate to AWS and Azure and Google Cloud, that we didn't have to own these things anymore. So I think there's a little bit of whiplash for some people that, oh, I thought we agreed. We were done with that. And then along come us and say, do you know what? Maybe you should have a computer.
Is there some pain points to running your own servers?
Oh, plenty. There's pain points to operating computers of all kind. Have you tried just like using a personal computer these days? Half the time when my kids or my wife have a problem, I go like, have you tried turning it just off and on again? Computers are inherently painful to humans. Owning your own computer, though, kind of makes some of that pain worth it. There's a responsibility that comes with actually owning the hardware that, to me, at least, make the burden of operating that hardware seem slightly more enjoyable. Now, there are things you have to learn. Certainly at our scale, too. I mean, we're not just buying a single computer and plugging it into an Ethernet. We have to have racks and racks of them, and you got to set it up with network cabling, and there's some specialized expertise in that. But it's not like that expertise is like building nuclear rockets. It's not like it's not widely distributed. Literally, the entire internet was built on people knowing how to plug in a computer to the internet, right? Oh, Ethernet cable goes here, power cable goes here, let's boot up Linux. That's how everyone put anything online until 10, 12 years ago when the cloud sort of took over. So the expertise is there and can be rediscovered. You too can learn how to operate a Linux computer.
Yeah, and it's, when you get a bunch of them, there's a bunch of flashing LEDs and it's just so exciting.
Beautiful, calming, amazing. Computers are really fun. This is actually something I've gotten into even deeper after we moved out of the cloud. Now my next kind of tingle is that if you could move out of the cloud, can you also move out of the data center? Personal servers have gotten really scarily quick and efficient, and personal internet connections rival what we connected data centers with just a decade or two ago. So there's a whole community around this concept of home labbing, which is essentially installing server hardware in your own apartment, connecting it to the internet, and exposing that directly to the internet. That harks back to those glorious days of the 90s when people building for the internet would host the actual website on their actual computer in the closet. And I'm pretty fired up about that. I'm doing a bunch of experiments. I've ordered a bunch of home servers for my own apartment. I marvel at the fact that I can get a 5 gigabit fiber connection now. I think, do you know what? 5 gigabit, that could have taken Basecamp to multiple millions of MRR in the way that back then I ran the whole business on a single box with 2004 technology and probably 100 megabit cable. Like the capacity we have access to, both in terms of compute and connectivity, is something that people haven't readjusted to. And this happens sometimes in technology where progress sneaks up on you. This happened with SSDs. I love that, by the way. We designed so much of our technology and storage approach and database design around spinning metal disks that had certain seek rate properties. And then we went to NVMe and SSDs, and it took quite a while for people to realize that the systems had to be built fundamentally different now, that the difference between memory and disk was now far smaller when you weren't spinning these metal plates around with a little head that had to read off them. You were essentially just dealing with another type of memory. I think we're a little bit in that same phase when it comes to the capacity of new businesses to be launched literally out of your damn bedroom.
So you can get pretty far with a large user base with home labbing.
Absolutely.
That's exciting. That's like the old school. That's really exciting.
It's bringing back the startup in the garage in the literal physical sense of the word. Now, some of that is, do we need to? You can get relatively cheap cloud capacity if you don't need very much.
Hell yes, we need to. I mean, the feeling of doing that by yourself, of seeing the LED lights in your own home. I mean, there's nothing like that.
There's just an aesthetic to it that I am completely in love with and I want to try to push on. Now, is that going to be the same thing as getting out of the cloud? I'm not sure. Our exit out of the cloud was not the exit out of the data center. We basically just bought hardware, shipped it to a professionally managed data center that we didn't even actually touch. This is the other misconception people have about moving out of the cloud, that we have a bunch of people who are constantly driving to a data center somewhere to rack new boxes and change dead RAM. That's not how things happen in the modern world at all. We have a company called Summit, previously Deft, that is what we call white gloves. They work in the data center. When we need something like, hey, Deft, can you go down and swap the dead SSD in box number 6? They do it. And what we see is akin to what someone working with the cloud would see. You see IP addresses coming online. You see drives coming online. It's not that different, but it is a whole heck of a lot cheaper when you are operating at our scale. And of course it is. Of course it's cheaper to own things if you need those things for years rather than it is to rent it. In no other domain would we confuse those two things, that it's cheaper to own for the long duration than it is to rent.
There is some gray area. Like, I've gotten a chance to interact with the XAI team a bunch. I'm probably going back out there in Memphis to do a big podcast associated with the Grok release. And those folks, in order to achieve the speed of building up the cluster and to solve some of the novel aspects that have to do with the GPU, with the training, they have to be a little bit more hands-on, so less white glove.
Oh, and I love that, right? They're dealing with a frontier problem, and they're dealing with it not by renting a bunch of GPUs at a huge markup from their main competitor. They're going like, no, screw that. We're going to put 100,000 GPUs in our own tents, right? And build it in absolute record time. So I think, if anything, this is testament to the idea that owning hardware can give you an advantage, both at the small scale, at the medium scale, and at the pioneer levels of computing.
By the way, speaking of teams, those are XAI, Tesla, are large companies. But all those folks, I don't know what it is about. You said Jeff is really good at finding good people, at seeing strength in people. Like, Elon is also extremely. I don't know what that is. Actually, I've never actually seen. Maybe you could speak to that. He's good at finding greatness.
I don't think he's finding as much as he's attracting. He's attracting the talent because of the audaciousness of his goals and his mission, the clarity by which he states it. He doesn't have to go scour the earth to find the best people. The best people come to him because he is, talking about Elon here, one of the singular most invigorating figures in both the same order of the universe here, haters and lovers, right? Like, he's having such an impact at such a scale that, of course, he's got to have literally millions of people think he's the worst person in the world. And he's also going to have millions of people thinking he's the greatest gift to humanity. Depending on the day, I'm somewhere in between, but I'm more on the greatest gift to humanity end of the scale than I'm on the other end of the scale. And I think that really inspires people in a way that we've almost forgotten, that level of audacity is so rare that when we see it, we don't fully know how to analyze it. We think of Elon as finding great talent, and I'm sure he's also good at that. But I also think that this beacon of the mission, we're going to fucking Mars. We're going to transform transportation into using electricity. We're going to cover the earth in internet. It's so grand that there are days where I wake up and go like, what the fuck am I doing with these to-do lists? Like, Jesus, should I go sign up for something like that?
Yeah.
That sounds invigorating in a sense. I can only imagine like a Viking back in 1050 going like, should we go to Normandy? You may die along the way. But oh boy, does that sound like a journey and an adventure.
There's a few components there. One, definitely this bigger than life mission and really believing it. Every other sentence is about Mars, like really believing it. It doesn't really matter what, like, anybody else, the criticism, anything. There's a very singular, focused, big mission. But I think it also has to do with a bunch of the other components, like being able to hire well once the beacon attracts. And I've just seen people that don't necessarily on paper have a resume with a track record. I've seen who now turned out to be like legendary people. He basically like tosses them the ball of leadership,
Yes.
sees something in them and says like, you go, and gives them the ownership, and they run with it. And that happens at every scale. That there's a real meritocracy. And like, there's something, there's just like, you could see the flourishing of human intellect in these meetings, in these group getting together, where they're like, the energy is palpable. It's like exciting for me to just be around that, because there's not many companies I've seen that in, because when a company becomes successful and larger, it somehow suffocates that energy that I guess you see in startups at the early stages, but like, it's cool to see it at a large company that's actually able to achieve scale,
I think part of the secret there is that Elon actually knows things. And when you know things, you can evaluate the quality of work products. And when you can evaluate the quality of work products, you can very quickly tell who's full of shit and who will actually take you to Mars. And you can fire the people who's full of shit, and you can bet on the people who get us to Mars. That capacity to directly evaluate the competency of individuals is actually a little bit rare. It's not widely distributed amongst managers, hiring managers. It's not something you can easily delegate to people who are not very skilled at the work itself. And Elon obviously knows a lot about a lot, and he can smell who knows stuff for real. And is this at our tiny scale something I've tried to do in the same order, where when we hire programmers, for example, it's going to be interesting now with AI as a new challenge. But up until this point, the main pivot point for getting hired was not your resume, was not the schooling you've had, it was not your grades, it was not your pedigree. It was how well you did on two things. A, your cover letter, because I can only work with people remotely if they're good writers. So if you can't pen a proper cover letter and can't bother to put in the effort to write it specifically for us, you're out. Two, you have to be able to program really well to the degree that I can look at your code and go like, yeah, I want to work with that person. Not only I want to work with that person, I want to work on that person's code when I have to see it again in 5 years to fix some damn bug. So we're going to give you a programming test that simulates the way we work for real, and we're going to see how you do. And I've been surprised time and again where I thought for sure this candidate is a shoo-in. They sound just right, the CV's just right, and then you see the code getting churned in, I'm like, no way are we hiring this person. And the other way has been true as well. I've gone like, I don't know about this guy or this woman. I don't know. And then they turn in their code stuff, and I'm like, holy shit, can that person be on my team tomorrow, preferably? The capacity to evaluate work product is a superpower when it comes to hiring.
There's the step that I've seen Elon do really well, which is be able to show up and say, this can be done simpler.
Yes.
But he knows what he's talking about. And then the engineer, because Elon knows enough, the engineer whose first reaction, you can kind of tell. Like, it's almost like rolling your eyes if your parent tells you something.
Yes.
This is not, no, I've been working on this for a month. You don't know. But then when you have that conversation a little more, you realize, no, it can be done simpler. Find the way. So there's when two engineers are talking, one might not have perfect information, but if the senior engineer has like good instinct, that's like been battle earned, then you could say simplify, and it actually will result in simplification.
And I think this is the hallmark of the true greats, that they not only have the insight into what's required to do the work, but they also have the transcendent vision to go beyond what the engineer would do, the programmer would do. I think if we're looking at these rarities, obviously the myth of Steve Jobs was also this. Even though perhaps he was less technical than Elon is in many ways, he had the same capacity to show up to a product team and really challenge them to look harder for the simplification or for making things greater in a way that would garner disbelief from the people who are supposed to do it. Like, this guy is full of shit. Like, this is crazy. We can never. And then 2 months later it is. So there is something of this where you need the vision. You need it anchored by the reality of knowing enough about what's possible, knowing enough about physics, knowing enough about software, that you're not just spewing bullshit. There are plenty of people who can tell a group of engineers, no, just do it faster. Like, that's not a skill. It's got to be anchored in something real, but it's also got to be anchored in, it's a tired word, but a passion for the outcome to a degree where you get personally insulted if a bad job is done. This is what I've been writing about lately with Apple. They've lost that asshole who would show up and tell engineers that what they did was not good enough in ways that would actually perhaps make them feel a little small in the moment, but would spark that zest to really fix it. Now they have a logistics person who's very good at sourcing components and lining up production Gantt charts, but you're not getting that magic. Now, what's interesting with that whole scenario was I actually thought how well Tim Cook ran things and has run things at Apple for so long that maybe we were wrong. Maybe we were wrong about the criticality of Steve Jobs to the whole mission. Maybe you could get away with not having it. I think the bill was just going to come later, and now it has. Apple is failing in all these ways that someone who would blow up Steve's ghost and really exalt him would say, like, see, this is what's happening now. So the other thing here, too, of course, is it's impossible to divorce, like, your perception of what a critical component of the system and the messy reality of a million different moving parts in the reality of life. And you should be skeptical about your own analysis and your own thesis at all time.
Since you mentioned Apple, I have to ask, somebody on the internet submitted the question, does DHH still hate Apple? I believe the question is. So there was a time when Basecamp went to war with Apple over the 30%. Can you tell the saga of that battle?
Yes. But first, I'll tell you how I fell in love with Apple, which was all the way back in also early 2000s when Microsoft was dominating the industry in a way we now see Apple and Google dominate mobile phones. Microsoft was just everything when it came to personal computers. And I really did not like the Microsoft of the 90s. The Microsoft of the 90s was the cut off the air supply to Netscape kind of characters, was the Bill Gates sitting defiant in an interview with the DOJ asking about what the definition of what is. And just overall unpleasant, I think. You can have respect for what was achieved, but I certainly didn't like it. And as we've talked about, I came begrudgingly to the PC after Commodore fell apart and I couldn't continue to use the Amiga. So I already had a bit of a bone to pick with PCs just over the fact that I love my Amiga so much. But then in the early 2000s, Apple emerged as a credible alternative because they bet the new generation of Macs on Unix underpinnings. And that allowed me to escape from Microsoft. And suddenly I became one of the biggest boosters of Apple. I was in my graduating class at the Copenhagen Business School. I started with the first white iBook, first person using Mac. And by the time we were done and graduating, I had basically converted half the class to using Apple computers because I would evangelize them so hard and demonstrate them and do all the things that a super fan would do. And I continued that work over many years. Jason and I actually, in I think 2004, 2005, did an ad for Apple that they posted on the developer side where we were all about, like, Apple is so integral to everything that we do and we look up to them and we are inspired by them. And that love relationship actually continued for a very long time. I basically just became a Mac person for 20 years. I didn't even care about looking at PCs. It seemed irrelevant to me, whatever Microsoft was doing, which felt like such a relief because in the 90s, I felt like I couldn't escape Microsoft, and suddenly I had found my escape. And now I was with Apple, and it was glorious, and they shared so many of my sensibilities and my aesthetics, and they kept pushing the envelope, and there was so much to be proud of, so much to look up to. And then that sort of started to change with the iPhone, which is weird because the iPhone is what made modern Apple. It's what I lined up in 2007 together with Jason for 5 hours to stand in a line to buy a first generation product where Apple staff would clap at you when you walked out of the store. I don't know if you remember that. It was a whole ceremony. And it was part of that myth and mystique and awe of Apple. So I wasn't in the market for other computers. I wasn't in the market for other computer ideas. I thought perhaps I'd be with the Mac until the end of days. But as Apple discovered the gold mine it is to operate a toll booth where you don't have to innovate, where you don't actually even have to make anything, where you can just take 30% of other people's business, there was a rot that's crept in to the foundation of Apple. And that started all the way back from the initial launch of the App Store. But I don't think we saw at the time, I didn't see at the time, just how critical the mobile phone would become to computing in general. I thought when the iPhone came out that like, oh, it's like a mobile phone. I've had a mobile phone since the early 90s. Well, it wasn't a mobile phone. It was a mobile computer. And even more than that, it was the most important computer, or it would become the most important computer for most people around the world, which meant that if you like to make software and wanted to sell it to people, you had to go through that computer. And if going through that computer meant going through Apple's toll booth and not just having to ask them permission, which in and of itself was just an indignity when you're used to the internet, where you don't have to ask anyone permission about anything. You buy a domain and you launch a business, and if customers show up, boom, you're a success. And if they don't, well, you're a failure. Now suddenly, before you could even launch, you'd have to ask Apple for permission. That always sat wrong with me. But it wasn't until we launched HEY in 2001 that I saw the full extent of the rot that has snuck into Apple's Apple.
For people who don't know, and we'll talk about it, HEY is this amazing email sort of attempt to solve the email problem.
Yes, I like to pitch it as what Gmail would have been with 20 years of lessons applied in a way where they could actually ship. Gmail was incredible when it launched in 2004. And it still is a great product, but it's also trapped in its initial success. You can't redesign Gmail today. It just has way too many users. So if you want fresh thinking on email, I wanted fresh thinking on email. I needed to build my own email system. And not just my own email client. That's what a lot of people have done over the years. They build a client for Gmail. But you're severely constrained if you don't control the email server as well. If you really want to move the ball forward with email, you have to control both the server and the client. And that was the audacious mission we set out to do with HEY. And that was what's funny. I thought our main obstacle here would be Gmail. It's the 800-pound gorilla in the email space. Something like 70% of all email in the US is sent through Gmail. I think their world rates are probably in that neighborhood as well. They're just absolutely huge. And trying to attack an enormous established competitor like that, who's so actually still loved by plenty of people and is free, seems like a suicide mission. And it was only a mission we signed up for because we had grown ambitious enough after making Basecamp for 20 years that we thought we could tackle that problem. So I thought, hey, this is dumb. I would not advise anyone to go head to head with Gmail. That seems like a suicide mission. We're going to try anyway, because you know what? If we fail, it's going to be fine. We're just going to build a better email experience for me and Jason and the people at the company and our cat, and that'll be okay because we can afford to do so. But when we got ready to launch, after spending 2 years building this product, millions of dollars in investment to it, we obviously needed mobile apps. You're not going to be a serious contender with email if you're not on a mobile phone, and you need to be there with a native client. So we had built a great native client for both iOS and for Android. And as we were getting ready to launch, we submitted both of them to the app stores, got both of them approved on, I think, Friday afternoon for the iOS app. And we then went live on Monday. And we were so excited. Hey, world, we've been working on this new thing. I'd love for you to check it out. And of course, as with anything, when you launch a new product, there's some bugs. So we quickly found a few in the iOS client and submitted a new build to Apple. Hey, here's our bug fixes. Can you please update? And that's when all hell broke loose. Not only were they not going to approve our update, they said, oh, wait a minute. We gave you permission to be in the App Store, but I'm sorry, that was a mistake. We see that you're not using our in-app payment system, which means that we don't get 30% of your business. You will have to rectify that or you can't be in the App Store. And first I thought, well, it got approved already. We're running on the same model we've run Basecamp on in the App Store for a decade. If you're not signing up through the app, and we're signing up our own customers on our own website, and they're just going to the App Store to download their companion app, we're going to be fine. That was the truth, right? That was why I never got so fired up about the App Store, even as Apple started tightening the screws, was like my business was okay. Now, suddenly, my business wasn't okay. Apple was willing to destroy HEY if we did not agree to give them 30% of all the signups that came through the iOS app. And it wasn't just about the 30%. It was also about splitting and not longer having a direct relationship with our customers. When you sell an app in the App Store, you're not selling an app to a customer. You're selling an app to inventory at Apple, and then Apple sells an app to that customer. That customer has a purchasing relationship with Apple. So if you want to give discounts or refunds or whatever, it's complete hell. If you want to easily support multi-platform, that's complete hell. If someone signs up for HEY on their iPhone and they want to switch to Android, but that billing relationship it's tied to Apple, it's complete hell. For a million reasons, I did not want to hand my business over to Apple. I did not want to hand 30% of our revenue over to Apple. So we decided to do something that seemingly Apple had never heard before. We said no. We're not going to add the in-app payment. I don't care if you're threatening us. This is not fair. This is not reasonable. Please approve. And of course they didn't. And it escalated. And after a couple of days, we realized, you know what? This isn't a mistake. This isn't going away. We're going to be dead if they go through with this. If we're not going to yield and give them the 30%, they're going to kick us off. Unless we make such a racket, such noise that they will regret it. And that's exactly what then happened. We were blessed by the fact that we launched HEY 1 week before the WWDC, their Worldwide Developer Conference, where Apple loves to get up on stage and harp on how much they do for developers, how much they love them, and why you should build for their new devices, and so on and so forth. And then we also just happen to have a platform on the internet, which is very convenient when you need to go to war with a $3 trillion company. So I started kicking and screaming and essentially turning it up to 11 in terms of the fight and going public with our denial to be in the App Store. And that turned into a prolonged 2-week battle with Apple that essentially ended in the best possible outcome we could have gotten as David fighting Goliath, which was a bit of a truce. We wouldn't hand 30% over to Apple. They wouldn't kick us out of the App Store, but we had to build some bullshit